First, to get us started, is Felix Nakanant reading a poem titled "The Lost Cause."
Hi, this is a poem I wrote when I was in freshman year, and it's called "The Lost Cause." My heart was tugged at like a cat with yarn. You had left me with a feeling that was quickly unraveling, that I couldn't control, and that took over everything. Before I only felt love and bliss. Whenever you walked into a room, you walked with warmth around you. Now you leave me confused every time you pass me, making me have goosebumps. Eyes of neediness and desperation, begging for a clue as if you're angry or happy with me. The constant change in mood when I say something, that bothered look that you give when I talk to you. For a long time, I received those looks as if they were another pair of socks that I don't need, as if I can regrift them and move on. Give those terrible looks to someone else. Leave those moods in someone else's hands, and make someone else feel the feelings that you left with me. But I'm done. I'm done acting like a wire to a phone. I'm done letting you control the feelings I'm meant to feel. I'm leaving behind that horrible feeling and moving on from you, moving on from a best friend, moving on from confusion, moving on from a terrible person that we both have become, and moving on from a lost cause. The time that was spent and the words that were spoken and the glared glances at each other, all lost to a friendship that could and would never be.
All right, thanks very much, Felix. Our next student presenter is Finley Roman.
The story does not have a name, but it is a work of fiction. Passing through a red window, the baby lands comfortably in someone's arms, swaddled in warm blankets. The baby's eyes open, fresh to the world. To the right sits a worn leather couch. A nurse quickly hurries in from the left. The world is tinned mahogany to the baby, a deep red overlaid upon the cramped hospital room. Shuddering, the child takes their first breaths in the world and bellows loud cries. Today, this child is born, with a whole life ahead. Alexandra, come back here. Alexandra giggles, zipping around the corner of the hallway into the living room with her mother chasing after. The mother sounds almost out of breath when she finally pauses her pursuits. The bus will be here soon. You need to get your shoes on and go to the bus stop. I don't like the yellow bus. I want the orange bus back, Alexandra whines, standing to a stop and rolling around. It looks weird now. The mother shakes her head and just sighs. Now don't tell lies, honey. You're 9 years old. The bus isn't yellow. The child shakes her head. It is yellow. I learned how the colors worked last year, she insists. Well, honey, if you learned your colors, you should know that's impossible. Alexandra glances out the window as the school bus turns onto their street, watching it intently. The metal exterior is a deep yellow, like a butterscotch candy, barely removed from the shade of a shriveled lemon, the painful early light doing nothing to brighten the shade to her. Metal always takes on this shade of the viewer's color, the time they have left. But why would the mother believe Alexandra? A 9-year-old doesn't see yellow. A 9-year-old sees the world as a fuzzy peaches, bright and pleasant, a few steps away from light red, just tumbling into the rich shades that orange delivers, young in heart and body. But there's no reason anything should be wrong for Alexandra, but nothing else to change the color of the bus idling outside. Eyes brimming with tears, Alexandra tears herself away from the window just before the mother reaches her. I'll just go put on my shoes, I guess. There is no point. A 9-year-old does not see yellow. Why would her mother believe her? Sirens blare while a girl lays helplessly in an ambulance. Clutching a cracked phone in her hands, the lumen backing looked to her like a fresh field of grass in the summer when the EMT carefully takes it out of her hands to put in an IV. The girl continues sliding in and out of consciousness while the ambulance weaves in and out of traffic before eventually turning into the hospital parking lot. Before the girl knows it, she is brought in on a stretcher into the emergency room. Alexandra, stop! A doctor walks in from the door to the left, wearing a clean white jacket with a name badge attached to their front pockets. The girl tries to sit up too quickly. Her head starts spinning as a lively spring green invades the corners of her vision. Alexandra, yes, what's going on? She winces, a fresh strap of pain to her skull impeding her ability to finish the sentence. The doctor motions for her to lay back down. We don't know yet. From their front pocket, they pull out a small piece of aluminum foil and smooth it out. Can you tell me what color this is, please? Alexandra frowns. Her head is still a little bit foggy. She gestures weakly to the doctor and asks for the piece of foil. Alexandra takes it in her left hand and holds it up against the harsh fluorescent light from the ceiling. She is suddenly aware of the room. To the right of her is a window, but everything outside is dark. Wasn't it morning? The doctor notices Alexandra staring outside. It's 8 at night. You came in at about 9:30 this morning. Do you want me to get anyone for you? A few hours? Sorry, I lost my spot. Alexandra nods, wincing in pain again while slowly lifting the foil back up to the light. She doesn't want to move or think any more than she has to. All she can think of doing is answering their questions and going back to bed. This foil piece is green, just like the forest painting on the wall. Alexandra turns over in bed to face the window. May I go back to bed now, please? When the doctor leaves a minute later, they are a little bit green themselves. A few hours later, Alexandra's father, mother, and sibling arrive. Her mother's hands simply hold a book about the color spectrum and death. Seeing green at 15 years old means the clock is ticking faster towards purple, knocking at her door. So much time is the same, so little left. Alexandra laid back on the hill outside her old elementary school. After her family moved far away to be closer to the hospital, Alexandra always wanted to come back and visit before going to college, knowing she probably wouldn't make it that far. When the piece of foil from the doctor started to look like the bright blue sky on a dry winter's day, time was up and now Alexandra was back, looking up at the sky again. A vibrant rainbow from a blanket of stars blinked above her. Their colorful hues were not based on heat like previously theorized, but their age. Off on the horizon, a red star blinked into existence, the distant light of its birth just reaching the planet. Hanging above her was a Russian violet dot, twinkling in the chilly sky. Slowly, its rays started to darken, slipping from the Russian purple into a hue barely visible against the sky. It was dying, and so was Alexandra, faster than ever before. The now regalia-stained grass fluttered in the wind and tickled Alexandra's arms as her eyes fluttered shut. Her heart quickly beat in its chest, and shadows started to invade, huddling around her. Black was here, and when she closed her eyes, it was the final shade she would see, all of the colors bleeding together into one. And then, amidst the darkness, white came flooding back. Red soon followed. To the right sits a worn leather couch. A nurse quickly hurries in from the left. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Finley. And now our main act is Miss Megan Lavery. Miss Lavery is a former English teacher, now turned PE teacher, and this LHS staff member is no stranger to stories or storytelling competitions, and we get to hear all about it. Please welcome Mrs. Megan Lavery.
When I did this third period, this picture was not up here. It feels a little strange to stand on a stage and see yourself. I was an English teacher for about 15 years before I decided that I wanted to teach health. PE is kind of like attached to health, so I teach PE, but it's really health that I love. And this is my first year at LHS. It's my first year teaching high school. I've never been to Writers Expo. So standing up here in front of all of you, doing this, which was kind of an unknown thing, is super scary. And I felt it was important to do because I think that you need to see that taking risks and getting out of your comfort zone is something that you should never outgrow. Right now, you are going to be doing things in your lives that are going to be uncomfortable, and that is okay. And you should continue that process so that you can grow and evolve as humans throughout the rest of your life. I didn't tell a story last period, or third period when I did this, but I think that I'm gonna do that because it kind of introduces what I'm about to tell you, which is about public, true, personal storytelling. It's something that's accessible to all of you, and I wanna get into like why it's so meaningful and impactful and why I think it's like the key to all of our humanity, but I'm gonna tell you and show you kind of what I do first. I'm gonna move over here though. And because I hadn't planned on telling a story, normally the premise of storytelling and storytelling competitions is that you don't get to have a script. You don't get to have any notes or any writing in front of you. You stand up in front of an audience and judges, you tell your story, and you're competing against the other storytellers. And part of that is that you know your story and you don't mess it up. So I'm gonna just give that caveat that I do have notes because this is something I just decided to do between third period and fifth period. This is a story that I told at a storytelling competition called the Moth Grand Slam. It was the winners of smaller storytelling competitions in the city, so kind of like the best of the best coming together to compete against each other. I told it in 2019, so like just before COVID, and I did not win. I actually came in second by 0.1, was super disappointing. But this story was put out onto one of their social medias, the Moth social medias, and just this year I came to like PE class, and this girl was like, Mrs. Lavery, you were on like TikTok this morning. So one of the videos of the story that I told was about active shooter drills in schools. To you guys, this is like old news. You've been doing active shooter drills, lockdown drills, whatever they're called at different educational places forever. But when I wrote this story at the start of it, it was the very first lockdown drill that I had been a part of as a teacher and that my students had been a part of as 7th graders. And coincidentally, in that class of 7th graders, my advanced ELA class was our very own Mr. Brandon Murchison, who was my 7th grade student in this class, the story that I wrote. So he was in that with all of us. I was sitting on a metal stool in front of my desk, holding my copy of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, when out of the corner of my eye, through the janky metal blinds that never really closed all the way, I saw like weird shadows or figures. And before I could process what I was even seeing, over the intercom came this sound. We are in a full building lockdown. We are in a full building lockdown. And I prayed it was just a drill, but I was not for sure. And adrenaline pulsed through my body as I rushed to the door, pulled it shut with one hand, and used my other hand to get the students to stand up, move against the wall, and sit down along the cabinets. Just as they got seated, we heard from the windows where the figures were a loud bang, 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 pounding at the windows repeatedly. 2 girls grabbed hands, their matching friendship bracelets trembling on their wrists. And a boy who was usually so quiet and reserved sat up, spread his arms out as if he was shielding the rest of the students from the sound. And the pounding continued, but it faded as it moved from our window to Mrs. Bratsky, to Mrs. Hodet's, until we couldn't hear the pounding anymore. And I know that we were all holding our breath in that room because I was in a room with 27 7th graders, and I could hear the clock tick. I didn't even know that the clock made sound, and I had been teaching in that classroom for years. Then we started hearing noises by the door. And I had a synapse in my brain that I had forgotten to lock it that morning. I had been so careful to come in and lock the door behind me ever since a staff meeting we had had a few weeks before. It was 2008, and there had been a shooting at Northern Illinois University on Valentine's Day. It also was our parent-teacher conference night. So I was sitting in parent-teacher conferences as their phones started to light up, getting information about the shooting that was happening not that far away, where many of the parents had children who were attending there. And it was this shooting that prompted the staff meeting that we were at a few weeks later. Our principal had worked with authorities to put together plans and procedures and just basically a process for what to do in this lockdown in case we ever had an active shooter. And we sat at this staff meeting, and this was something we had never even really considered that we would be doing drills for. And they told us that they wanted the drills to mimic real life. So we weren't gonna get the time that these drills were gonna happen. Just know that we've given you a script, you know the procedures, and your jobs, teachers, is to keep the kids safe. And I took that very seriously because I believe that school should be a safe place no matter where you live. And that was why I was freaking out that I had not locked the door on this particular day. But soon the noises that we heard outside of the door calmed my fears in some ways, because the banging on the door, and we could hear them jiggling the lock, we could hear it holding its place as they tried to violently open my door. The kids who were sitting closest to the door were stricken. Their jaws were clenched, they had their eyes scrunched shut, they were making fists and squeezing their hands so tightly that their knuckles were turning white. It was like they were bracing for impact. I recognized the shouting, the let me in, as our administrators and office staff. So in that moment, I knew that this was a drill, but my students did not. And it didn't really make me feel any better because I just kept thinking what the hell would I do if this is real? Is this something that's really gonna happen? So I reassured myself with the same idea that I told my students a few minutes later when the drill was over, and we all kind of gathered together to talk about what had happened. And I said, here's the thing, guys, school shootings don't happen. In 10 years since Columbine, there's only been a handful of school shootings, and they've all been at colleges and universities. We have tornado drills, we have fire drills. You're not afraid of those. This is just something the school needs to have in place as a protective measure. And I felt pretty good about that answer. Until a girl raised her hand and said this. So, Mrs. Lavery, if I was out getting a drink or something when that went on, what would happen? What if the door was locked when I came back? What would I do? I'm like, crap. I don't even know what to say. So I looked at her because I had a script to go by, thankfully, but I knew what the script said. And the script said that I had to look at that barely 13-year-old girl in the eye and tell her that I would have to leave her in the hallway, that I could not compromise the 26 other students already locked in the room to let her in. And she recoiled, and a veil of innocence fell down her face with her tears, and she said, "You mean you would leave me out there to die?" No, yes, maybe. I don't know. How do I answer these questions? What do I say? So I gave her the answer that I had to fall back on in the script, and that was that this is an anomaly. This wasn't going to happen in Lake County, Illinois. Shootings don't happen in Lake County, Illinois. And she accepted the answer, and so did the rest of the class, because it was the security that we needed to hear in that moment. Now fast forward 10 years, it's 2019, I'm teaching in a new middle school, and these kids have been doing active shooter drills, lockdown drills, since they were in kindergarten. And I can't look at them anymore and tell them that school shootings don't happen, that there won't be shootings in Lake County, Illinois, that I don't have to be concerned about that they're an anomaly. Because between 2009, the first year of our drill, and 2019, in those 10 years, there had been 180 school shootings in that decade. So when the lockdown drill came on, and we heard over the intercom, we are in a full building lockdown, the students didn't look to me at all. They had zero questions for me. They were more like military operatives than awkward teenagers as they planned how to barricade the door with the heaviest desk and which stapler would be the best to use to throw at someone. And when I brought my finger to my mouth to usher them to be quiet and move against the wall, a kid looked at me unflinchingly and said, "Mrs. Lavery, your job is not to save us. We have to save ourselves." And I looked up at a sign that had been hanging in my room for all my years of teaching, and it says something like, "The job of the teacher is to enable the student to move forth without you." And in all of the years I had looked at that sign for inspiration, the way that it played out was in that situation. So, thank you. That's the end of the story. Okay. So this is a piece that I use for competitive storytelling. I'm gonna say that as a PE teacher, I know that there's maybe some certain judgments about PE teachers can be creative, PE teachers can write. I have been kind of stuck in that dichotomy of being an athlete and being a creative and being an English teacher and being a PE teacher my whole life. And I'm standing up here to tell you, don't pigeonhole yourself into one thing, especially at your age. I'm gonna go through this presentation and talk a little bit about my background. Then I'm gonna talk about storytelling in general and why I think it's so important. And then I'm gonna talk about the Moth specifically, storytelling competitions and ways that if you want to get involved, you absolutely can. So first thing, that's me. The competitions that I do are all based on NPR, National Public Radio's competitions called the Moth. And people come together writing about a theme, and you have to construct a story that's 5 minutes or less. If you go over 5 minutes, they play a little sound, you get points deducted. So you're writing a story that is engaging, hopefully, that touches people in some way, and also you want to win. It's yes, we're sharing stories, but we're also sharing stories because we want to win. So there's it's multifaceted. When I was a kid, I grew up in a small town in central Illinois, outside of Champaign. I had a lot of writing accolades as a young person, all the way through school. I loved sitting in my room reading. I loved lyrics. I would lay my albums, my record albums, because that's actually how we listened to music. It wasn't just a cool vintage thing. That was my option to listen to music. And I would pull the inserts out and I would read the lyrics and I would learn them. And then when I was in second grade, I won a contest called Young Authors where I wrote a story about, it was called The Ballerina That Couldn't Dance. When I was in third grade, I was published in something called the Penny Whistle Press. It was an insert that went in the Sunday paper nationwide for kids, and it was a poem about Halley's Comet. And then fifth grade, I won a talent show because I wrote a rap about all of the topics we had learned that year. When I was in middle school, we had what I would call the abacus of texting and DMs. We wrote notes on paper with pretty pens, and we'd fold them up and we would pass them to our friends in the hallway, and that was how we would communicate with each other throughout the school day. We also had, a version of group chat. It was a notebook, and we had 4 friends, 4 besties, and we'd all write notes to each other and we'd pass it around during the day. And then my writing became more personal. My mom died right before I graduated from 8th grade. And suddenly I needed writing as an outlet to help myself because I was sad and I was overwhelmed. And writing became a place that I found some healing and some comfort. And then my senior year, I was in an AP rhetoric class, and my teacher said, "Hey, you're a really good writer. You should consider taking my creative writing class next semester." And I was like, this lady's just trying to get people in her class so that it will be a class that they continue to offer. I was like, no way. Because despite all of these things signaling to me as a young person that I had writing as something I was good at, the way that I saw myself was an athlete, 100% and only. I was a 3-sport athlete. I started varsity as a freshman at shortstop. I had a Division I scholarship to college. In the community where I grew up, being an athlete came with lots of perks. Your community knew you, you were in the newspapers, your friend group was the people that you wanted to be friends with, and so this part of me kind of stayed hidden. It wasn't something that I got involved in, it wasn't something that I explored, and I feel like I missed out on a lot of cool people, of cool experiences and opportunities, because I saw myself as one thing. And all of you are collectively way more than one thing. So if there's anything that you take from me talking today, at this point in your life, step out of your comfort zone, try something that you think you might like, even if you're not good at it, try it. You never know what you might find enjoyable, what you might be good at, and the people that you can meet by being involved in that. So storytelling in general, this is Steve Jobs, arguably one of the visionaries of our generation, saying that the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda of an entire generation to come. And stories are in your lives. Stories have been around forever, ever, ever. The tradition of storytelling, of passing down wisdom and family stories and stories of culture. From hieroglyphics to your Snapchat stories, it's not a coincidence that they're called stories. We are wired to share about our lives and to learn about other people's lives. Sure, it looks different now. A Snapchat story isn't even something I could fathom when I was in high school. But it's amazing. You guys know so much about each other through the sharing of your digital stories. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just can't be the only outlet for sharing your stories. TikTok, bless TikTok, I get sucked in. Someone has a good beginning line, an interesting, funny thing that they say. They're like, let me tell you about this. I'm listening. And then I keep listening, and then I keep listening. Because we need this and we want this. And it's no surprise to any of us that the world that we live in right now is deeply fractured. There are polarizing, there are extremes, there is a lot of discourse in the world that we live in. And I believe that the way to connect and heal from some of this is through stories. The quickest path between yourself and another person is a story. I cannot tell you how many times in teaching I've heard kids make some ridiculous generalization about a group of people. Well, they are like this and they do this, but not my friend. My friend who's in that group, but not them. It's not okay to make generalizations in the first place. But what I notice is, but not the person that I know and love, not the person whose story that I know. Because when you know someone's story, when you know their experience, when you know what they've lived through, it's much harder to judge them or make generalizations. Storytelling is a way that people can relate to each other, and stories have long been used as a way to get people thinking about viewpoints beyond their own, as well as to express our experiences to others. One of the things I love about storytelling, public storytelling, true storytelling, is the only job of the audience is to listen. So you get to go somewhere, you get to listen to someone share something about their life, and you don't have to try to awkwardly respond or say anything to them. You don't have to awkwardly talk to other people about it. You just get to sit and listen to someone's experience. The people that I've met in the Chicago area storytelling scene, I have heard stories about undocumented friends and their life as a young person in Chicago and what that was like. I've heard stories of people's medical journeys that I can't even fathom. I've heard stories about war and childhood trauma and generational trauma, things that I, in my lived experience, have not endured, but that I've learned about because I've sat and listened to what other people have to say. And it's broadened my horizon. When you know someone's story, it breaks down your biases. And the cool thing is, you don't even have to do a lot of work to tell a story because you don't have to come up with the time and the setting and the place and the character and the names and all the things when you sit down to write a work of fiction. You got to come up with all of that. You guys already have your stories. They're in your memories. They're the things that you've experienced. It's the lens in which you have viewed the world. A story that you write about something that happened, if you were in my middle school class and the story that I just told, your story would be different than my story. It would be different than another person in the class's story. That's the cool thing. Even though we were all a part of that experience together, our stories are vastly different. So the 4 Ps, which I'm sure your teachers have talked to you endlessly about in your English classes of plot, purpose, people, place, already exist. I get caught up in my phone. I get caught up in reading articles. I get caught up in social media. And when I stop and go like, wait a minute, I need to be present, there's stuff happening all around me. I started carrying like a steno notebook recently so that I could write those things down because I see them all as potential stories. And yeah, I teach freshmen all day, so like there's some funny stuff that happens there. This is from Andy Goodman, the Goodman Center. I'm gonna go through it quickly, just for the sake of time. You know probably most of these things, but some of the components of a good story are that you need to name your characters. Don't talk about random people. If it's your Coach Albert, it's Coach Albert. If it's your sister Patty, it's your sister Patty. Like whatever the person is, give them a name, they're a character. If they're worth putting in the story, they're worth giving a name. People in your story have to want something. You're working towards a common goal, something like that. Stories need to be fixed in time and place, but they can also jump back and forth in time and place. So one of the stories I tell is about the time I ran the Chicago Marathon in 2016. I am not a runner at all. It's super hard for me. But I was turning 39, and the marathon happened to be on my 39th birthday, 10/10. And my mom, who I mentioned passed away when I was in 8th grade, died just before her 39th birthday. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna honor my mom by doing this really hard thing. I'm gonna run the Chicago Marathon because I get to have a 39th birthday and my mom didn't. So when I told that story, I started the story while I was in the corral at the marathon and things that were happening while I was getting ready to start this 26.2 mile run. But I went back and forth in time. So the time and the setting need to be given, but you can definitely go back and forth. You want your characters to speak for themselves. If there's something that someone said, make a dialogue. Don't tell what they said, let them say it in your story. Like the girl who said, "Mrs. Lavery, you would leave me out there to die?" It's so much more impactful when you get the voice of that young girl versus me telling you that that's what she said. Audiences bore easily, for real. There are times when I go up to tell a story and things that I think are gonna be like great, and they're just looking at me, I'm like, crap. I have like 3 more times I'm gonna reference this, and so now I kind of have to shapeshift what I'm saying, because what I thought was gonna be funny or sad or something is not. Speak the audience's language. I would not get up here and talk to you about like teacher terms. If I started talking about like the technicalities of an IEP, a 504, a BLT, y'all would be like, wait, what? So you want to talk in language for a generalized audience, not for a specific group of people. You definitely, stories make you feel something. Whether you feel happy, sad, angry, whatever that emotion is, work it. You want your audience to feel what you're feeling. Stories don't tell, they show. Hashtag English teacher language since you were probably in 3rd grade. Stories have at least one moment of truth, that point that you're building to, the climax, the what is happening next moment. And then clear meaning. And this is where I've seen people who have some really good stories like really kind of get lost. They tell a great story and then they spend the rest of the time explaining what the story means. If you did a good job telling a story, you don't have to then tell the audience the meaning of the story. They should have gotten that from the story itself. I think I'm gonna bypass some of this simply because time. So stories matter for community. I think they matter for our society, that we can get to know each other. Stories matter because as humans, we want people to know us. We want to be seen. But in real life, practical ways, outside of relationships, you all need to know your stories, because when you apply to college, that's what you're gonna have to sell to them, is your story. Why are you, Megan Lavery, what do you bring? What is your experience that makes me want you to come to my school? Why should I hire you instead of these other applicants in this job? You are going to be crafting your personal statements and your stories to hopefully propel you into your future, whether you're going into the workplace or you're going to college. Some of you may have already started doing that. So storytelling is important for society, but practically it is really important for you to start identifying what moments in your life have been important enough? What have been transitions in your life that you've grown through? What is your story, and how are you going to get that where you can write it in an essay or speak it in an interview? My process for writing. So the Moth is like this. You're given a theme. You know the theme when you go to the show. So some of the themes I've written on are hot mess. Another theme is chemistry. These are all things that are like so broad that like chemistry could be about a baseball team. It could be about a romantic relationship. It could be about an academic class. So you get to pick how your story fits to chemistry. And you show up at a venue like Lincoln Hall, which is a place that I tell stories. And you put your name in a hat. And there's like 50 other people that put their names in a hat. And then they pull the first name. And that person goes up and tells a story. And there's judges in the audience that hold up cards and they give you a score. And then they pull out the second person, and that person goes up and tells a story. So you don't know if you're gonna get to tell a story when you show up that day. You write, you have a story prepared, but you don't know if you're gonna get to go. And they only pick 10 names. So only 10 people of the people in the hat get to go. Then if you win that, you go on to tell at what's called the Grand Slam. And that's like the winner of all of the story slams come together and compete against each other. So for me, I have the theme. I start mining for stories. I literally get out a piece of paper and I start writing down anything that I can think of that relates in my life to that topic in any way. And then I pick the one that I think works the best, that I could write the most about. I think of the message that I want to give. The first time I told a story at the Grand Slam, there's like 2,000 people there. I was freaking out. I was talking to a friend and she was like, Megan, when do you ever have 2,000 people listen to you? Like, you're gonna have 2,000 people listening to your words, like, and that's it. No distractions. Tell a story with a message that you want those people to hear, because you're gonna have 2,000 people listening to you. So I always think about the message that I want to convey in my story. I work on the dialogue, I read it out loud, and I record myself. There's nothing cringier than listening to your own voice on a recording, but it is a very good way to figure out what sounds good, what works, and what doesn't. Then I make changes. You only get 5 minutes, so I gotta kind of fix with the timing. I generally share it with friends and family, and then I practice, and I practice, and I practice, because even though it's my story, and I've lived it, I have to remember the order and the ways that I want to tell it. Since I started doing storytelling, probably only about 6 years ago, so many things have happened because of storytelling, like cool things I got to be a part of, outside of just the competitions and the cool people I've met. This picture in the middle in front of the Illinois State Capitol was taken last Wednesday. I was asked to go to Springfield and testify in front of the Education House Committee about paying student teachers a stipend, because teaching is one of the only professions in which you have a required internship, but you get no compensation, and we have a teacher shortage. So because of my storytelling, I was asked by our state rep to go down and testify in front of the House Committee to speak to paying student teachers. I was invited to be a part of a backpacking weekend in North Carolina in the mountains, where I was going to get to teach about creative writing to women who had been through trauma and were being taken out to feel empowered. These are how some of the scores are, so you can kind of see this is the scoring that happens at the Moth. I was invited to Ragdale, which is an artist retreat in Lake Forest. If you haven't heard of it, it is a place where celebrated authors, Rebecca Mackay, come together and they do their writing there. So many artists, dancers, authors have done their writing at Ragdale, and I got to go be a part of that because of storytelling. I'm a youth mental health first aid instructor, which I got to do for free, and I've gotten to talk to so many people across Lake County about how to help kids who might be in a mental health crisis. I got that grant because of my storytelling. And then I'm an Illinois Policy Fellow, which is up in the front at the top. This is a group of teachers across the state, and for the year we come together and work on policy and legislation that impact Illinois schools. Right now we're working on something called reimagining schools, because we are in a school system that is antiquated and we need to probably do better. So I leave you with this, that great stories are all of these things. And all of you have your own stories. And I hope that you are telling them to your friends. And if you're not telling them to your friends, I hope you're writing them in your journals. I hope that you are learning about yourself through exploring creatively, through writing and storytelling. And if you happen to want to ever do something like this, I just searched up last night Chicago area storytelling events and found a link and copied this week of March. So last night in Libertyville at 7:30 at the Parch Pub is an open mic. It's not a story slam, it's not a competition, it's just a place you can go with work that you've written, with a story that you want to tell, with a poem you want to share. And everyone just gets up and reads their thing, tells their stuff, and then there's an audience that listens. So there are so many events throughout the Chicagoland area. You don't have to be a celebrated author to participate. You just have to have lived a life, which is what all of you have done and are doing. So, I am done. And does anyone have any questions at all? We have about only a minute. Yes. The Moth is always nonfiction, yes, and it always has to be a true story that you experienced.